In the categories on the left-hand side, we have Dream Market, which is still up, and Trade Route, which is also still up. Huge chunk of drugs. You can choose from your dissociatives to your psychedelics to your stimulants, if that's more your speed. No, I'm trying that one out. Thank you. That's what I needed to know. And you can see here, again, you have plenty of filters. You can choose a price range. You can see ratings. Vendors can pay to have sticky listings the same way you would on other sites. This is all the same sort of sales and marketing techniques you might expect. But like actually there was a lot of drugs. Yeah, just like a ton of drugs. Next slide.
They probably all take Bitcoin, I would assume.
Bitcoin, some accept Monero, Ethereum. Bitcoin is accepted on almost all markets. It's kind of just the classic cryptocurrency, but some markets are rolling out new cryptocurrencies over time too as well, depending on where the demand is. These are a couple examples of carding markets we talked about. So what you can see here on the far left, these cards are traded by BIN, by Bank Identification Number. If you are a card vendor, you don't want to give away all of your secrets. What you're selling is that full card number, right? That's what people want, the PAN. And so you trade by BIN, and you tell them who the issuer is, what the network is it credit or debit, when does it expire? You have location information, so you have a good sense of where can I safely use this card without sending up red flags. And then you have price. And you can see here, these are pretty cheap, considering no one's going to be using their own money to buy them. Next slide. Forums, exploits, we talked about this a little bit. So on the top here, you can see some examples of ransomware with the date they were added, the name, the language, and then helpfully whether or not there is a guide to go along with it. We'll come back to guides later on. And then forum. Looks just like a forum. You can see people are looking to either sell or buy, trying to advertise. A lot of reputation building is in these forums. People go and say, hey, I'm a new vendor. I want to break into this. I'm willing to offer free samples to the first 5 people who comment if you'll vouch for me and go leave me a review. This is where people have a lot of their dispute mechanisms. Hey, my package is late. Where is it? What's up? Oh, I'm really, really sorry. I was sick. Look, I'm sending it out right now. Expedited shipping, and I'll include an extra 5 grams for free. I'm really sorry. You know, hey, let's work together on this. And so it's really interesting to see people try to break into these communities because this economy is pretty well established. And if you're a fraud vendor, you're competing with other well-established fraud vendors, but the risk to the buyer is pretty low. You can imagine, though, if you're dealing with a new drug vendor, that's a lot of trust. You have to trust when you get that product that, I mean, frankly, it's not going to kill you. So maybe you don't want to be the first person to review it. Next slide. So weapons. Yeah, weapons are an interesting thing on the dark web. It's one of these half myths, because weapons do exist. They are for sale. You can buy them on the dark web, but they are not nearly as prolifically traded as you might believe. So there are some major markets that will sell weapons. They will sell firearms. They will sell grenade launchers. Not so much in the major markets. They'll sell things like flashlight tasers or hunting knives. But then there are certain independent markets like this one, which has been up pretty reliably for a couple of years now, where you have obviously something a little bit more involved. And in the dark web community, these are largely considered to be honeypots or scam sites run by law enforcement designed to target people who find the most obvious, easiest place to buy a Remington defense, right? There are also one-off deals. A lot of this will happen more privately. You know, hey, I've got a guy who's got a guy. So, oh, there we go. Then there's the weird stuff, which I like to throw in, because it's not all doom and gloom, and I want to give you a break before we talk about fraud. So, top left is one of my favorite listings I have ever seen on the dark web. This went up just before Christmas last year. It was a pair of African gray parrots. The vendor was trying to sell them with their toys and their food and everything they need for a happy life for the well-being of these babies. And was offering to do a Skype call for proof of life, just so you know that you're actually going to get some parrots. It was still up until just after Valentine's Day, so I'm not going to speculate, but maybe somebody got an interesting gift. And then there's also just the truly weird stuff, like this November 2016 Guide to Practical Fish Keeping. You can also buy guides for food photography, origami. You can buy textbooks and you can learn to code. You can buy packs of Halloween coupons from 2015. It's an interesting mix. So if you take away nothing else on kind of what the dark web is and how it works, before we jump into fraud, I promise the fraud is coming. These three things. The dark web is functional, it is measurable, and is a tractable part of the online economy. This is not as mystical or enigmatic as you might be led to believe. This is a thing that you can track, it's a thing that you can understand, it is a thing that you can predict as much as you can ever predict any kind of commerce. It operates under the same rules as traditional commerce and marketing. So what this looks like, we talked about reviews and dispute mechanisms. We talked about people trying to build new business. This also looks like sites decorating for the holidays. It looks like seasonal sales, drugs at Halloween and New Year's, as you might expect, or Black Friday sales for the carding markets. The dark web is also just another part of the internet. There are cats. There is a cat picture somewhere in this deck. I won't tell you where, but I promise there are cats. And the important thing to understand about that is that it is concerning. There is dangerous and damaging information. There are real problems with this. But these users are just like the users on the rest of the internet because they are the users on the rest of the internet. It operates in ways that you can understand. It is an extension of the kind of online world that you already know. And so I want to remove the mystery there, not the threat, not the concern, like this is a problem as we'll see in a moment, but I want to dispel the notion that this is something that you can't possibly track or understand or no one knows what's going on or it's all happening in back rooms. It is dangerous, but it's understandable. It's accessible. And I think that's important as someone who works in this industry for everyone to understand. I think the more you hide behind this and the more you say, oh, the dark web, don't touch it. I mean, don't touch it, be careful. But understand that it is something that is more familiar than you might expect. I promised there would be fraud. We've reached the fraud portion. So when it comes to fraud on the internet, next slide, thank you. Show of hands here, who uses a password manager? Okay. And I will raise my hand here. Who has in their life reused a username and password across multiple sites? Okay. The first thing to know about fraud on the dark web is credentials. Credentials are sold sometimes. You can go and buy a specific type of credentials, whether this is Netflix or for a bank account or for Uber. But these are also circulating constantly on the dark web and dropped often in large volumes in plain text for anyone to have a field day with. And this is a problem because of password reuse, right? A password that you used 4 years ago could still be a problem now, right? Because if someone gets, access to, Yahoo, if someone gets access to your Yahoo accounts, maybe they have access to a Yahoo account you're not using anymore, but now they also have access to your Netflix account and your bank account and your insurance information. And where else have you used that? What about your kids or your partner, or your parents? These are being circulated constantly and they are being exploited constantly. And imagine, just to put yourself in the seat of a criminal for a moment, you get a username and password. You have no idea what it's for. What are you going to do? Probably start by checking the top 10 sites that come to mind. What are the chances this is being used on social media? Let me check a few banks. Let me check a few streaming sites. Let me check some travel sites. Let me check Amazon. There's also personal information. If this top set of details looks to you like the Equifax data, you'd be right. And I say that because there is an established market for this kind of information on the dark web, and that's what makes this a problem. There is already a demand for this, and there are already clear paths to monopolize on this, right? And so these are traded, some of them in what are called fulls, or full identity kits. And then some pieces of information, like a social, for example, or usernames and passwords, will be sold off piecemeal. There are other kinds of information, personal health information, sometimes extended personal history or family information. Who's heard of doxing or doxes? Just a handful, okay. So doxing, or being doxed, a dox is a targeted and extended leak of personal information, typically for one or a handful of individuals. And this is really personal. And so this goes beyond just your information, just your basics. It gets into your employment history, all of your financials. It gets into where you went to school, your political affiliations, your donation history if they can find it, your hobbies and your hobbies. Thank you, Ashley Madison. Also extended family information, going after partners, your children. Where do your kids live? Where do they go to school? What are their usernames and passwords? Your parents, and even other relatives. I saw someone once who was clearly very unhappy with the targeted individual who had listed contact information and home addresses for like cousins 3 times removed. It was this huge list. Go after them, see what you can do. Also financial information, as we've discussed, so credit cards, debit cards, and PINs, account numbers. Bank accounts aren't traded as much in bank accounts aren't traded as much as credit card numbers. When they are, one example of how this works is someone will take a screenshot from inside the compromised bank account, showing the balance and showing the screen behind the login to show proof. And so you know what kind of balance, in theory, you're buying. And then payment accounts, of course, PayPal and Venmo. These also circulate pretty widely. We talked about marketing and about sales tactics. This is an example of an announcement put up from a major carding market. And so let's just run through this. So daily fresh dumps for a successful work week. Buy cheaper in wholesale and find new bins. So hey, daily. These are brand new, just got them. They're fresh. We want you to be successful because remember, people are doing this to make money. You can buy cheaper if you buy in bulk, and that's true. And new bins, we've expanded our coverage. Whether or not this is true, they've hit all the high points. Thundering valid rates. Validity rate, and you can see at the bottom, 98%. Validity rate refers to how kind of likely it is that the group of cards is still valid and active. So the longer cards have been up for sale, the validity rate drops down, and then eventually, once it gets below a certain point, they will either discount them down to 50 cents a card or something, or they'll pull them because you want to have valid cards. And then you have a nice little graphic indicating, hey, I think I've got some pins over here. And the group of cards is called Liberty Shield. They tell you what you're getting. You're getting 2 tracks of information from the card data, city, state, and zip. And so when you think about this, you have to think like a fraud vendor and then also think like a fraud buyer. One of the reasons that this kind of information is so widely available on the dark web is because people want to make money. There is a market for this. And if you're a vendor, you're not going to hide this away. You're going to take a few steps to make sure everything is as secure as you feel like making it because you want to ensure your business. But you're not going to hide away in some corner of the internet and make this difficult for people to find. To think like a fraud buyer, then you have to think, hey, what are my options? I want to, it's not my money I'm spending, but I want to economize on this. I'm going to look for a site that I can trust. I'm going to figure out repeatable processes so I can scale this. Maybe I can automate it. And you're going to work through this as best you can so that you can also make money, right? There are no names, or there are names sometimes. There are no faces attached to this. And so people are just trying to economize as best they can. And so this, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a much more familiar process than you might expect for it to be. This is just another market on the internet. And so, okay, we've talked about how the dark web works. We've talked about what kinds of sites we have there. We talked about how that's structured. And we've talked about what we need to consider. How do we think about it as a fraud buyer and as a vendor? So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, how is this information valued? And we touched on this already a little bit, right? Because sometimes information is valuable because of what it is, because of the data type. If you give me a credit card number, I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. There is a market for this already, there are repeatable processes, and I know exactly what to do, and I can just roll with it. And this is the same thing for the Equifax information, right? Because there is already a market for how you exploit this kind of personal information. Another example of data that's valuable because of what it is, that we don't see now, but we'll see in a couple of months when the season starts, because some of this is cyclical, just like the rest of commerce. See a theme here? Tax information, W-2s. File your tax returns before the actual W-2 holder gets to it. And then some information is valuable because of where it comes from. So we talked about username and password combination a little while ago. You have a username and password, and you are a criminal. What are you going to do with it? You're going to go try a few things, right? But if you know where it comes from, then you know exactly how to act on this. And so the difference here is between something that's more opportunistic, hey, I've got this information, I'm going to capitalize on it, or something that's more targeted. Hey, I have a username and password for this company. I'm going to go after them. Because it's not going to help you with some other company. You can't really use it for something else necessarily. If you have employee credentials for a specific company, then what's valuable to you is being able to use it for that purpose. And in case you need help, in case you're not exactly sure what to do with this, the dark web is there for you. Guides are widely available, and these are incredibly cheap. These run for as little as $1, and sometimes the bulk packs you can get 500 fraud guides for $10. Again, not your own money, but that's still a bargain. And these run through everything from step-by-step processes. This is a guide on how to make a phishing page. And note that this is PH, though I did see a guide for deep sea phishing in a fraud pack once, and I'm not sure if that was a funny joke or if somebody just got confused. These guides walk you through step by step, and sometimes these are highly technical. Sometimes these are social engineering. Hey, I was at this bank, and they changed their policies recently on how to open a new account. So here's what you need to know. You need this document, but they'll let you use this one if you tell them a sad story. Go to this location. Go on this day, this time. And the interesting thing about that, to touch on the documents for a minute, is that the dark web also has templates to forge these documents. You can buy templates for not just passports and driver's licenses, you can also buy templates for utility statements or other bank accounts. You get these really glossy, highly detailed Photoshop templates, and you plug in the identity you just bought, and you go. So we have takeaways, because I promised we would do. So what does this actually mean in practice? There are some things you should know. We'll start with knowing. The fraud trade on the dark web is alive and well and was barely impacted by the Alphabay takedown. And the important thing to know about that is that it means that this community really operates more in isolation. It operates very separately from the rest of the community. And actually there's some bickering back and forth, as you might expect, between fraud users and buyers and drug users and buyers, because how could you steal someone's identity on one side, and on the other side, how could you put those chemicals in your body? If you show up in the wrong forum, people don't take that very well. And the fraud trade operates in predictable ways. We talked about this. There's a clear marketing and sales strategy. It's very easy to go in and buy and sell information. Maybe it's not your breach, but it's still your problem. We're going to talk about Equifax because they're the ones for today, but the Equifax data, that's not just you or your kids or your family, that's your employees. And that data is not going anywhere. Maybe it's a third-party vendor. Maybe it's some other affiliation this person has. This information is being traded, and even if it didn't come from you, it may still come back to haunt you. And then there are dozens and sometimes hundreds of data leaks. Leaks, not breaches. Leaks in a given week that go unreported. This is information dumped in plain text. This is elementary schools, universities, hospitals, small businesses. I saw a jewelry store in Hawaii that barely had a website. Here is our customer database and all of their financial information. This is being leaked constantly. And often, honestly, there's no title. We don't know where it came from. Here's a leak of personal information. Do what you will with it. And I don't know if it's yours. I'm pretty sure if it's mine. But it shows up, and it keeps cycling through. And these are leaks that are still up for years to come, sometimes. We also have things to do. Everyone loves an action verb. Assess the data that you have and identify your most crucial assets. What does this mean in practice? In practice, this probably means your employees. Because point 2, evaluate the basics and reinforce those. When you think about the kind of information here that we've discussed, the most easy to exploit thing, the thing that's most easy to exploit is the human element. You can have all the information in the world, but eventually you're probably going to need to interact with somebody. And so you have an employee email address, or you find their personal information and you find out where they work. Or you go to a bank and you say, oh my God, I forgot my passport, but I have my birth certificate. Will that do? It's not actually my birth certificate, it's from a template I bought online, but that's fine. And so this is not some sort of threat that touches on some esoteric part of your security that you haven't thought of. This is basic security hygiene that's being impacted because, again, people want to economize on this, they want to have repeatable processes, and so they're going to go for the lowest hanging fruit. The last thing to do here, then, is to track when, where, and how your information is showing up on the dark web so you can take action. And I will add a caveat here. That's what my company helps people do, so if you have questions, feel free to ask me later. One last recommendation. So I saw this documentary I really liked. Thought I would recommend it to you guys while I'm here. So I promised you there'd be cat pictures. I will leave you at the end with a cat picture. This is one of my favorite Tor hidden services when I'm not looking at stolen credit cards. It's called Tor Kittens. It is a slideshow of cat pictures, and that's my information at the bottom. Any questions? Yes?
So if we thank you for offering your services, but if we want to go in the dark web as our own sort of knowledge user to sort of audit or find out what information is being sold to us, are we complicit in being a part of some potential criminal act, or do we actually have to conduct a transaction on the site that may theoretically be posed as a honey pot, to your point, run by law enforcement?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer it partially just because I don't think that I am an authority on what may or may not make you complicit in criminal activity. But you are using the appropriate techniques and security, operational security. You are able to go and look at this information without having to commit a crime. I mean, that's what we don't commit any crimes in the work that we do. We don't buy stolen information, we don't hack anything. And so you are able to go in and see this, and you are able to view it and browse through it without needing to commit any crimes. And so if you are talking about whether or not purchasing stolen information is adding to the demands and drive in the online economy for identity theft, I think that's a pretty valid question to ask. And an important one I think we should be asking in this industry. But you don't need to make purchases and you don't need to commit any crimes in order to take a look at what's out there. Does that answer your question? Partially? Yeah.
Have you seen any correlation or cross-referencing on the dark web between the OPM data breach and the Equifax data breach yet?
It's a good question. So the question was, have we seen any correlation on the dark web between the OPM data breach and the Equifax data? The Equifax data is an interesting one because right after the breach, there were a few different sites that popped up claiming to have the Equifax database for sale and give us all your Bitcoin. We haven't actually, to my knowledge and from no one else that I've talked to in the industry yet, begun to see any information that has been validated to be Equifax data circulating. And so because of that, we haven't seen any correlations yet because we're just not seeing it show up in that sense. Yeah. Yes?
Is there a difference between the dark web and the deep web?
There is a difference between the dark web and the deep web. So when you think about the deep web, you think about things that aren't being indexed by search engines, and this is things that are behind password protected logins. And so if you log into your bank, for example, or there are other sites that are also not being indexed that are part of the deep web. But when we think about the dark web, we think about these anonymizing technologies that are masking kind of user information. And so that's things like the Tor hidden services we discussed, or the I2P network is another example of that. So there is a distinction there. Yes?
What's the relationship between law enforcement and the dark web?
What's the relationship between law enforcement and the dark web? Let's see. Private sector security researchers aren't the only ones who are conducting investigations and analysis on the dark web. And so law enforcement is certainly there. And I will say that the dark web community knows that. And so every so often you'll get some sort of new user who's trying to go into too much detail about how they got their package delivered and their neighbor didn't know. And someone's like, there are feds here. Come on, man. Get it together. So there's definitely a law enforcement presence. More specifics than that isn't something that I'm in a position to speak to, but law enforcement researchers are definitely on the dark web, and people know that. Yeah, the users know that. Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very
so
good.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have just 1 minute. I do have a couple announcements.